How long have you been intimate with him? I asked, as the chaos swirled around us. Margo stared at me, as tense and on edge as a cat meeting another cat in an alleyway. Her eyes darted here, there, and everywhere. "Why did you hit that man?" she shouted. She needed to be heard over the noise of people excitedly swirling around to take a look at the man on the floor, and me, the guy who put him there. "Because he told me he was intimate with you. I didn't feel the need to let him get away with it." "But he never said a word to you." I sighed. It seemed we were going to have to go all around the houses to get to the truth on this. I took her arm and drew her out onto the balcony. The view out over the city was good, but my attention was elsewhere. "Johnny, what's this all about? You just stood up and hit Frederick for no reason." Damn it. Why won't she allow me a level of intellect that understands signals and not just words? It wasn't for no reason. I'm not some psycho who goes around hitting strangers for no reason whatsoever. I told you. It was for being intimate with you, my less than faithful wife. She turned the tap on, blubbering through the tears. "How can you say that? How dare you? I have never—" I cut her off. "Yes, you have, and lying to me now isn't going to make anything easier, so why don't we just let it all out and hopefully feel better about this storm you've dragged me into?" "Why would you say that? I've always been completely honest and true." "Stop it!" I shouted. "I've known you've been stepping out on me for weeks now. I just didn't know the who of it until tonight, until that told me." "But he never said a word." "He didn't. But he still said it just as clear as day." "I don't understand," she wailed. "I was going to have to wait around anyway until the emergency services turned up. Police, ambulance, and maybe even the fire brigade or even the army. It all depended on who had been called, so we might as well get through it." I told her to wait there, putting enough sternness into my voice that I knew she would comply, and went to get us drinks from our table and that lovely little cigar case that had the cutter and lighter built in from the suit jacket I'd hung on the back of my chair. I loved that case just as much as I loved its contents, had done ever since Margo had given it to me for my birthday the previous year. When she had been promoted to department manager shortly after that, I had bought her a lovely sapphire and emerald pendant. We liked giving each other things we had extensively and exhaustively searched out. When I returned, she had sunk into one of the metal wire chairs that dotted the hotel balcony, which ran alongside the conference room her company had booked for the evening's award ceremonies. As I pulled up another of those monstrosities and sat down beside her, she tried to get started. "Johnny, I raised a finger at her, signaling her to wait. Then I drew out a cigar, clipped it, and lit it. When it was glowing nicely, I turned to her. "You've been messing around on me for the past 3 weeks, maybe more, probably more. You thought you were hiding it, but you weren't. It was your stories that gave you away." She looked incredulous. "What do you mean, my stories? What are you talking about?" I gave a ruefully bitter laugh. "The stories you and your women friends tell when we all get together." We were still quite young, had been married 6 years with Bethy, our daughter, and had a lot of friends who were very much like us. Yuppies, I suppose, is the best word, although I don't like thinking I am one. So every weekend, we would all hang out at one or other of our homes, or head to the lake or park for a barbecue and drinks. And in the natural course of things that always seems to happen at these get-togethers, the men would slowly congregate together in one group and the women in another, and each would regale the others in the group with stories about their partners. The men would basically bring each other up to date on what was going on in their lives, conversations they'd had with their wives, decisions made, plans put together for future vacations, or places they'd discovered that their children might like. Then the conversation would swing away to business, politics, and, of course, sport, with little byways into remembering when, trying to make each story more interesting or funny than the previous speaker. We all had pretty good senses of humor, and blasts of laughter would foghorn from the men's group at regular intervals. and the women would do the same. Except their conversations seemed set at a much more basic level than ours. There were no fixed rules or even conscious decisions about when and how the groups would form, and people would split away to chat with people in the other group all the time, reminding a partner of something they had just thought of, telling a tidbit of gossip just heard that was too good to wait until the trip home, or just for a hug and a squeeze of a hand. It's just how people are when they get together. The thing is, I'd hung out near the women's group often enough that I knew the topics of conversation would usually be about husbands, children, homes, or something newly purchased. Hell, that was what the men covered as well, among other things. But the tone was very different. The women in our circle of friends would start off casually gossiping about what was going on in their lives, which would gradually morph into what their husbands were doing, and then change further into what their husbands were doing wrong. When it came to things they did wrong, husbands were the preferred topic, even beating out how horrendous their children's moods, untidiness, and eating habits were as the greatest source of merriment. It would start lightly, with a little emphasis here and there when describing something a husband had done, causing much hilarity amongst them. Then it would quickly become a competition to one-up each other about how awful their husbands were and how badly they screwed things up. Each story would be interrupted by screeches of laughter at a mean comment that one of them would chip in, and the mood would seem to get even nastier as each new raconteur took up a tale. Thank God for children, as it was usually they who would interrupt the group's toxic conversation, kids complaining about each other, crying over a fall or scrape, or whining for something to put in their mouths. Hey, I'm not moaning about the kids, they were just doing what all kids do. I know now that this is not an unusual state of affairs when women get together. Hell, even I think that quite a few husbands are absolute jerks who don't deserve the wife they have. So the conversations are a way of lowering tension in the women and allowing them to vent in a passive-aggressive way which they can blow off as just having a laugh. But the first time I heard it ramp up, the way it always does, took me completely by surprise. I was in the kitchen checking the marinade on the steak and chops and could hear the women chatting in the lounge. There was a burst of laughter that brought a smile to my face, and I began to consciously listen in. May was having a go at Dom, who, according to her, always tries to score some three-pointer by throwing his socks at the laundry basket from his side of the bed. He even tries to do trick shots by making them spin in the air. Idiot stuff like that. Like there's some crowd watching and cheering him on. Hey, at least he tries for the basket, moaned Annie. Greg just drops them on the floor, as if the act of taking them off makes them non-existent. They exist when I have to pick them up to do the laundry, that's for sure. I don't even mind that, interrupted Freddie. What I object to is the skid marks, and the fact that Vern always manages to turn his boxers inside out when he takes them off, and I have to turn them right side out again to wash. I don't even want to look at that, and I still have to turn them right side out. With my hands. Can you believe it? I couldn't help having a silent snigger at the hapless Vern and his careless toilet habits. He always tried to come across as the macho man, and now, Georgina chipped in. Pete balls his undies up if they have skid marks in them and then tucks them into his socks, so I have to pull them out again to wash. They are the undies with minions on them? Asked Reggie. Oh, now he has more. New ones with the Avengers on. Georgina came back. Iron Man? Sniggered Freddie. Actually, I think it's a male version of Elastigirl, Georgina said, straight-faced. The laughter from the whole group was almost deafening. Wow, she just dumped Pete into the garbage disposal of female opinion with that remark, and they just got worse and worse as the conversation went on. Everything from Pete's apparently limp noodle to Stan's flirting with women and Dom's fat belly, which by all accounts needed a corset or even more appropriately a bustier, were torn apart for their amusement. Every husband with a wife in the group took more than one tank buster during that conversation, and I didn't think Dom was much overweight at all. It actually shocked me. I thought these women were happy to be married to their men. Yet here they were in some sort of unacknowledged competition to make their husbands the very worst man in their whole circle of friends. Sure, there was lots of laughter going on, but it seemed at the very least to be disloyal, and at worst, outright sneering derision. How could they stand going home with their spouse thinking the way they did, even if they didn't mean it? Damn, at a minimum, it was cruel. There was no respect apparent. Luckily for me, Margo didn't take part in these discussions. She would dip into it when passing by, but would wave and smile when encouraged to sit in with them. Until 3 weeks ago. We were at Klaus and Ingrid's house, and as I was passing the lounge window, I saw Margo sitting in the group, wine in hand and laughing hard, both puzzled and curious. I entered the house and remained out of sight. There was the normal complaining about the husband's habits and nasty desires, each in turn having to outdo the previous offerings. Then I heard Margo chip in. "Oh, God, I know all about that. The noises that Johnny makes when he flosses his teeth." I heard her make noises as if she was throwing up, sneezing, humming the theme from Frozen, and gargling all at the same time. I felt my face grow heated. "I think that's the noise Vern made when we made love last night," giggled Freddie. "The last true romantic." "Not a chance," laughed Margo. "My husband is way more romantic. When Johnny finishes, it sounds like a vet just stuck his arm up inside a cow without any warning." She giggled loudly. "No smooth talk or dinner, just womb," chortled Annie. "Not even a flower in sight," Margo finished. There was a delighted howl of laughter. I moved on. I didn't want to listen to any more of that. If there's one person who knows how I sound when I finish, it's me. There wasn't a single note of truth in what she just said. When I come, I don't yell or bray or anything the women had come up with. I let out a series of long, low sighs, as if experiencing an expected pain, like when a doctor carries out an extended check on your sprained knee and it hurts, although you're braced for it. I didn't want to cause a fight in front of our friends, so I stayed cool but not unresponsive for the rest of the day. We got home after a day of wine and sun, and after putting 3-year-old Bethy to bed, just hit the sack and went straight to sleep. But that sound kept echoing in my mind, and it promised to hang about unless I worked it all out. The next day was Monday, so I called Henning Moritz in HR and invited him to lunch on my expense account. Henning was German by birth and was unfortunately true to the largely false caricature of the lack of humor of his nation, but he was very intelligent and, more importantly, had studied psychology at university before going on to major in personnel management. "Ah, I understand. You call on the German about such an emotional wound because you know we are such an emotional people," he said, his voice overly accented after I explained what I had heard. I stared at him blankly. "Yeah, that was a joke," he said after a moment of silence in his normal voice. "Sorry," I said. "I'm used to it. So what do you want me to advise you about?" "I want to ask why women would do that. Why would my wife do that and lie about me?" He chewed his lip and perused the lunch menu. "You know I subscribe to the philosophy of sexual economics." I did. He had explained the theory one evening at a boring work conference. "So in my view, she is joining this group to denigrate husbands for one of 3 reasons. Which one I can't tell without interviewing her, which I presume you don't want me to do." I shook my head. I didn't need her telling the witches' circle about that as well. I would drop to the very bottom of the league table of husbands if she related that. "The first and most obvious is that she feels separated from the group of women in your circle. She feels she needs to reconnect and is willing to throw your reputation to the wolves in order to do that." I nodded. I had already thought about that, but taking into account that we had been having these get-togethers with our group for years, I couldn't see why she would suddenly have that need. "Secondly, you may have wounded her with something you have or haven't done. and this is a passive-aggressive way of getting even with you." I nodded. What man ever knew what women got pissed off about? Until she finally, sometimes after years, revealed the truth about some horrendous crime you had committed. I decided to think about that further and examine my memory about anniversaries, casual remarks I may have made, or worst of all, any frantically vital appointment such as a lunch she had vaguely indicated she might want that I had forgotten to turn up for. Thirdly, she may be trying to lower your position in the group in order to raise herself up and achieve sympathy and support for something she plans to do. She wants to get people on her side against me? I asked. He shrugged. It wouldn't be the first time, would it? It happens within families all the time, especially between siblings. You know, that is also part of the sexual economic theory, the advancing of oneself at the expense of the other in order to gain resources or genetic material, depending on the sex of the protagonist of this action. In fact, he waffled on and on as we ate, and I remembered all too clearly why I didn't have lunch with him very often, but he had given me plenty to think about. "Who's hosting the get-together this weekend?" I asked later in the week, carefully casual. I couldn't bear the fallout if she knew my thoughts. I loved her and didn't want to face a month or more of silent accusation if she thought I was falsely accusing her of something. "Annie and Greg," she said. "That'll be nice. You seem to enjoy getting together with the girls." "I do. They're a nice bunch," she agreed. "You seem closer than you have been for a while." "Yes. I don't know why it's taken me so long to relax into their company." I thought about that. Could it be because they seem to be awful human beings, with no loyalty, respect, or high opinion for anyone? How could anyone relax in their company? After my wake-up call about the girls, I had taken to listening to their group conversations, and if one of them was absent, they would be ripped to pieces by the rest like a wounded and bleeding fish in the center of a shiver of sharks in a feeding frenzy. Henning had explained that as well. Women do gossip more than men, and as they mostly eschew violence, this is one of the main weapons in their arsenal. Men are hunters by nature, while women are gatherers. Nuts, seeds, and berries are good, but nowhere near as rich in nutrition as meat. So they are programmed to want the resources that men are traditionally better at bringing home. In return, they can offer intimacy and exclusivity, something that usually has no value when offered by men. A woman has to advertise herself to men, hence the makeup and clothes and all that, in order to compete with other attractive women. The other way to compete is through gossip, which is basically talking about another woman and the value of her sexual ability or exclusivity, while raising those values in herself at the same time. So, a woman hinting that another woman is a genetic weapon. Of course. Why don't they just come out and accuse each other of being that? I asked. 1. Because that would devalue the denigration. It's a potent weapon and has to be used sparingly. And 2, because first-hand knowledge would place her squarely alongside the in order to gain the knowledge, and that would lower the value of her own promise of exclusivity, and lowering that even a little could cause her a lot of damage in the genetic stakes. So gossiping is the answer? Geez, that's messed up. It's the way our monkey brains have been programmed, he said with a smile. But if they know they are all calling each other even just to each other, why don't they call each other out on it? Studies have shown that most women believe that their friends would defend them against such talk. Almost every woman interviewed maintained that she would defend her friends and firmly believed she did not spread any such gossip onwards. And yet, if that was true, there would be no gossip a go around, so I wouldn't take that denial at face value. He paused to think. Economically, perhaps it's to maintain the price of being exclusive. If a woman does sleep around, it increases the flow of intimacy into the market, which, like any other commodity, lowers the price. If they all did it, then the cost to a man of having intimacy would be almost nothing. He wouldn't have to spend much in the way of resources to get laid. However, if the value of that woman's sexual ability is lowered and the promise of exclusivity is questioned, then that maintains the price for those women who are regarded as virtuous and yet good in bed for one man. He took a drink. Good wine. I muttered something, wishing I'd never asked him about all this. To be seen as purely a provider of resources to a woman in order to get intimacy and the promise of faithfulness seemed just so sad. It was the conjunction of those two thoughts that brought up another. Margo had explicitly promised me that she would be faithful to me when we married, and implicitly promised to have intimacy with me at the same time. Was I getting neither? I certainly wasn't getting as much intimacy as I was promised, that was for sure. Once a week, maybe. It was once a month more often than I would like to remember. And if that new little nagging voice in the back of my head was right, then I wasn't getting any exclusivity either. In fact, it was more likely that someone else was getting that. So I watched. I wasn't going to fly off the handle. I had no idea if I was right. And if I wasn't, then bringing it up might actually cause something to happen out of anger, more than diffuse the situation. I loved my wife, but I wasn't blind to the fact that sometimes she was more than happy to cut off her nose to spite her face. So for almost 4 weeks I observed her. I didn't see much that was interesting apart from the fact that she was getting her girls on side each weekend with more and more cutting remarks. Then came the awards evening. I looked over all her fellow workers, wondering if there was a sexual aspect seething unseen beneath the surface. Logically, it was the right place to look. She went to work at 8 in the morning, got home at 6. She didn't travel, and there were no girls' nights except on her birthday, when she and a bunch of her girlfriends would head off to a show and a dinner at a fine restaurant. They would stay overnight in shared rooms, but by checking over her Facebook page and looking at the timestamps on all the pics stored in her phone, any lover would have to rush in, be intimate with her, and be cleaned up and gone within 10 minutes. So it wasn't impossible, but it wasn't likely. So where were the men that may have come into her life and inside her? At work? Where else? For some reason, perhaps because I was looking for a cheating so intently, or maybe because of the stupid Zapata mustache that he wore that was 50 years out of date, I picked up on him straight away. Glad-handing and joking with people, he worked his way towards our table. When he reached us, he greeted other people before saying hi to Margo. Their eyes locked and they gave each other a slight smile. Then he smiled at me, and the corner of his mouth crept up just slightly into a sneer. As he looked at me, his right hand reached up to his left shoulder, flicking at something with 2 fingers. 2 flicks. That was all. But it told me all I needed to know. He was letting me know that I was just a bug in his life, something that he could brush away with contempt. I stood up, leaned over, and punched the left side of his face as hard as I possibly could. I'm no fighter, and I don't have the arms of a Superman, but it was a good punch. He went down hard, and that's when the hysteria started, people getting all excited because something different had happened in their lives, and it hadn't happened to them. So they could enjoy it all guilt-free, which made them all run around making way too much noise. Margo had thought she was getting away scot-free with having an affair, and it had turned on its head in exactly the wrong place at the wrong time. The upper echelons of her company was mostly female, following the growing trend. But despite their earnings, they still could only offer intimacy and exclusivity to the men in their lives, when they had one. So having one cheater exposed so openly made them all afraid that their men might care to re-examine that half of what they offered to a partner. She wasn't going to be flavor of the month for a long time. Those stories you started sharing with your girl buddies, you know, the ones where you get to lie about all the bad habits I have and how your life is while I'm still around. Those are what told me. The sheer disrespect you managed to come up with is actually quite mind-boggling. The sheer inventiveness of those lies makes me think you should become a fantasy author. Was that to get the girls on your side when you left me? She shook her head, and then nodded. Yes, she whispered. So you were going to leave me, I stated. My life was a bowl of and it was the only thing to eat in the kitchen. I wasn't sure, she said. She was still crying, but she was no coward and looked me in the eye. I was afraid. I frowned. Of me? Are you serious? You thought I would harm you? She shook her head vigorously. I felt a tear drop land on the back of my hand and had to fight the urge to wipe it off at all costs. The cold liquid felt like frozen betrayal. No, I never thought that. You would never hurt me. I was afraid of being alone. So you did the one thing that would ensure it. That doesn't make sense. Besides, you had Mr. 70 Mustache to keep you from being lonely. You were preparing yourself to transit from me to him in real comfort. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. No, it wasn't like that. I knew he wasn't a keeper after the first time. It took a long time before I could commit to that first time, and afterward, well, the deed had been done. I had become a cheater, what I had always despised. So what did it matter if I kept doing it, even with someone I didn't even like much? I just wanted to get out of being married. I was so tired of having to take 3 people into consideration whenever I wanted to do something. I could never do anything spontaneously anymore. You managed to spontaneously end our marriage, I said, carefully showing no expression. Who was this woman, and what had she done with the gentle, loving girl I had married? Yay for me, she said sadly. Of course, what you could have done is say, Johnny, you're a piss-poor husband, and I don't want to be married to you any longer. I've been to a lawyer, and in 6 months I'll be free to be intimate with Mexican Mustache whenever I want. You could have done that. You didn't have to cheat on me. I told you I was afraid. I wanted to get out, but I was afraid of being alone. Well done, Margo. You don't want me and you don't want him. So you just signed up for immersion therapy. Now you can get over your fears by living it. It will be expensive, but worth it, I suppose. You earn more than me, and you know I'll look after Bethy way better than you anyway. So your spousal support and child payments won't be cheap, but hey, at least you get what you want. She pressed her lips together and nodded. And so our marriage ended on that note, while the little voices in my head were shouting that they had to know more. More details. More about who and why and how, when and how many times, and was his Johnson that much bigger? In the end, the voices simply chorused that the woman had cheated. There should at least be more punishment. I had an idea. One demand I will make. You go to our friends and you tell them that everything you said about me was bullshit and you were lying to make yourself some sort of martyr when you moved out, okay? I can do that, she sighed. You lied about me, and the sheer scale of the disrespect was eye-watering. Yes, it was. I'm so sorry about that. I felt trapped in a situation I had caused and couldn't see a clear way out. You heard it all? I nodded grimly. She put her hand on mine for a moment. I am sorry about that. You didn't deserve it, and I did make it all up. You were a good husband. Just not for me. I sighed. Everything was happening so quickly. I didn't have any control at all. I was in a speeding car with no brakes, and the steering wheel had come off in my hands. I had no experience of how to handle this. It's not every day that you go to a party married and still be at that party when you're suddenly single with a little girl to care for on your own. Not many how-to books cover that topic. You know those are going to slag you off every which way for years to come. I know. I guess I deserve it. You were right. I should have divorced you first. You thought of where you're going to go? I asked. I was going to find somewhere soon, but... Her hands waved loosely at the hubbub that was still going on inside. I guessed that she would be facing some very tough questions from senior management. I wondered if she'd still be employed. I guess it depended on what level of position Monsieur Mustache Bandit held. Jesus, Margo, how did you let it all get to this? What happened to the girl I married? She was smart and knew exactly what she wanted, as well as being beautiful and kind, loyal and in love with me. Where did she go? She actually thought about that for a while. I guess she became a manager and took that to heart to replace the things she was throwing away. Margo, I love you, loved you, but I don't want to be in your company anymore. I'm going to wait outside and see if the police turn up. If they take me in, please bail me out in the morning. You owe me that much. Okay, Johnny. She did bail me out, and that was the last time I saw my wife. When I did see her, the divorce was final. She was no longer my wife. She was someone else's problem now. I had a wife. I had had a woman I loved with all my heart. A woman I had promised myself to and looked forward to growing old with. She had discovered she didn't love me anymore and cheated so that she didn't have to face me until the very end. That's how I saw it. She did the crime and I paid for it. I faced loneliness and heartbreak, the gradual recovery from that and the more than hesitant search for someone to take her place, mistrusting all woman from here on. It wasn't going to be easy, especially with a demanding 3-year-old golden-haired enchantress to take care of. Margo had damaged me badly, but I wasn't down and out for the count. I thought about Henning and his sexual economics. I wondered whether being known as a cheating woman would lower her price over much. After all, any guy would have to wonder about her offer of good intimacy and exclusivity, as long as they knew about it. And they would. I'd very quietly make sure of that. And so, we've reached the end of today's story. Was it what you expected, or did it take a twist you didn't see coming? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below, and let's get a conversation going. If this story kept you hooked, make sure to hit that like button. And if you're new here or just haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join our community. I bring you fresh, captivating stories every day, so click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.